This is the story of one boy's suffering. One boy's suffering that was with him from the beginning, that gripped at him even tighter until he could no longer escape it. One boy's suffering that left him robbed of himself, forever changed by the events that overwhelmed him. That boy is me. Or rather, it used to be me. As a child, I really never had many friends. While growing up, I always seemed to move from one already established group of friends to the next. I was constantly harassed at school, always singled out as a bullying target because nobody really wanted me. Nobody valued the friendship I had to offer, nor did they give me a chance to be accepted. Because of this, I was always an angry child, and I'd constantly be involved in schoolyards fighting, because others seemed to find joy in hurting me, and as a result, I'd always bear injuries from having no help when the bullies and their equally shitty friends swarmed me. Eventually, my teachers grew sick and tired of trying to deal with my problems, and just left the bullies have their way. My parents were also just too frustrated while trying to help me to escape my torment. I always tried to explain that it wasn't my fault, that all the other students just seemed to despise me on sight, but it never really got to them. Eventually, I stopped trying and gave up on them. At about age 13, my parents had completely lost faith in me. They didn't care anymore. With nobody to communicate my problems to, I became extremely reclusive and developed a reputation as being a hermit. For the next 3 years, I shut myself off from the world as much as humanly possible, enduring the constant torment of the outside world, ignoring the sick and over-exaggerated tales about me. At age 16, there was a arrival of something else. Something worse. I was on my way home from the school in the dim light of the late afternoon, since I always made it to a point to go home the long ways as to avoid the other students and prolong going home to my indifferent parents. I wasn't too far from home, maybe a block or two away, when I noticed a pale glow in the middle of an empty street. My neighborhood was always full of weird people doing dumb things, so I paid no attention to it and kept walking. As I got closer to the source of the odd glow, I could make out the form of a girl. Once I could see her properly, all the lights in the area suddenly blacked out. The only thing that assured me that I hadn't been blinded by the lasting pale glow of the girl standing perfectly still in the streets. Even the faint glow, even the faint light of the setting sun had somehow been extinguished. Before I could even begin to panic, I heard the words, "Are you alone?" At that, I began to run. I couldn't see where I was going or even if I was going anywhere at all. All I know is eventually I turned to see what was behind me, if anything. I didn't like what I saw. "Are you alone?" she said, who was now standing right in front of my face. She looked to be about 14 and she wore clothes like some sort of maiden from the 70s. She had a face full of innocence and spoke her words softly. I slowly gathered the strength to answer her, and I noticed my watch was frozen, so there was no way for me to know how much time had elapsed. "Yes," I spluttered, unsurely. At this point, I could only think I was hallucinating or about to die. "Can we be friends?" she said next, leaving me speechless a while longer. Fear gripped me and I could feel the strain in my throat. I was stuttering for the words, any words, to break this sickening and ungodly silence. After a while, I was at the stage where I felt I needed to get this whatever this was over with. Yes, I answered, bleakly as I fell to the floor, having exerted the last of my willpower. The girl seemed amused. Her eyes seemed full of content and she had a small smile. Seeing this both relieved and unnerved me simultaneously. I don't know how to quite describe it. Almost immediately after the girl's clothes began to move of their own accord, her scarf like warping flower as thrown in a tornado, her long dress blowing in a breeze of hollow, empty nothingness, since the air was still. Her hair began to move slowly and the innocence seemed to be disappeared from her eyes. She opened her mouth slightly, and her eyes darkened until they were completely engulfed in the shadows that surrounded us. Suddenly I began to feel pain running up and down all through my body. I was gripped by the shock waves of pure torture that I was feeling and couldn't move. This continued until I passed out. When I came to, I was lying in the streets. I immediately got up and frantically searched for the girl, but there was no trace of her. The time was 1:50 a.m. It took longer than it should have for me to realize the intense pain was gone. When I finally got home, I decided to just leave for another day at school and leave the thoughts I was having until the morning. I was not granted that luxury, however. The little sleep I get was haunted with the nightmares, not of the girl, but of me being in pain. The same intense pain I had felt earlier. The end of the nightmare was much worse. The girl, her, she was there with her innocent goose haunting my every dream. Then I woke up, rather anticlimactically. I was thankful for that at least. As days turned to week, it seems that all I could focus on was the girl. She appeared at the end of my nighty dreams and was more aggressive each time. Many of the people at my school wouldn't acknowledge me. They never spoke to me. Having been bullied all my school life, this was a strange feeling. My family also wouldn't speak to me. My mother said it was like I was emanated a strange aura that chilled her very soul. I knew only one thing, and that was what was responsible. Her. I'd never told anyone about her. I knew I'd be ridiculed at school as always, and my parents would have sent me to a mental hospital. I kept quiet about her for my own safety. She had become my secret obsession. I even took to calling her the outcast maiden, a name I couldn't seem to get out of my head, and one that I thought fit perfectly. At this point, I was completely alone. For the first time in my life, I wasn't worrying about others and what they would do to me. Instead, I felt truly afraid, and I couldn't enjoy my newfound freedom because this was far worse. Finally, I gave up. I had no further reason to stay in this dead town, living in constant fear, trying to live normally with my school work suffering and my lack of any peace. I decided I had to leave. in the hope that I could escape or maybe find someone out there who knew what was happening. Anything was better than this. While my parents slept in the early hours of the morning, I took all the money I could find, including my parents' credit cards, and left for the train station. I was so distracted with not knowing where I was going or what to do that I was unable to process in my mind a terrible scenario that by now I should have been familiar with. I only have half an hour to get to the station before train leaves. I thought to myself, completely unaware that all the street lights had blacked out. By the time I'd seen the pale glow amid the endless blackness, I was so stressed and full of rage that I no longer feared her. I hated her, and I was prepared to act. "What the fuck are you? What the fuck do you want with me?" I shouted forcefully into the darkness towards her. She began to giggle, and I took a few large steps back. She began moving towards me, and my false anger induced courage had dissipated, and yet again I was frozen with fear. Her legs remained steadily still as her form drifted towards me. She was right in front of me again, smiling. That innocent smile. I remembered the pain from the last time when I started to tremble, and as she put an icy finger on my lips, I passed out. After awakening the second time, it was midday. There were a few people on the street and some cars driving by. Nothing was unusual aside from me regaining consciousness at the side of the road. Nobody had noticed me, nor did anyone look as I got up. As I traveled through the streets, I couldn't feel the ground beneath my feet. Upon looking down, I noticed my legs weren't moving, that I appeared to float as she did. Upon closer inspection of my body, I saw that I was pale and discolored. No matter where I went, nobody noticed me. Nobody could hear me, it seemed. I wrote down messages like, "Hello" and "I'm here," but nobody seemed to be able to see them. Nobody could feel my presence, not my parents, not my fellow students, not anybody. As I began to lose hope, she appeared again. This time, there was no hostilities. "The cruel cannot find us here, so it's nice," she exclaimed energetically. She then told me everything. Several others appeared, all of them like me, and I learned that our outcast maiden feeds on suffering, eats the unhappiness of humans. A few died as a feed, but most can become my friends. She continued, "The cruelty of humanity can harm us no further, and only those who are suffering, angry, keeping secrets or alone can hear our call, and our role is to find suitable candidates for our meals." And so I have written this, not as a warning, but to ease you in. To prepare you for your fate. For if you are able to read this, the writings I have created, then we already know your truth, as does our maiden. Even if you do not, many of us are initially denial. Be not afraid and do not resist. Embrace the truth. You will be in good, safe hands amongst us. She will be with you soon.